Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Pocket Theology. Today, Jason and I are going to be talking about the word invest and not just investment as we see it in regards to finances or that 401k that you're waiting on, but investing in the kingdom of God. What does it look like to invest our time, our talents, our treasures? What does it look like to prepare the house of the Lord for the next generation? Um, and where can we fit in that? So if that sounds interesting or encouraging to you at all, we're so glad you're here. Wait, let's get into it.
Yeah.
We're having good conversations
Yeah.
already. Let's start this podcast.
We're gonna roll.
Sometimes we get a little ahead of
No,
ourselves.
it's good, man. Hey, thanks for watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this week we're gonna be talking about why investing matters in the kingdom. And I want to be clear, this is different than tithing.
Right.
Okay, so money is such a sensitive topic.
No,
And
Jason, people aren't shy or bashful about
No.
talking about their personal finances.
And it's so funny because, and I've heard people say Jesus talked more about money than just about anything else. And I've also heard people say Jesus talked more about hell than anything else. And the truth is, Jesus does talk about money. He
Mhm.
does talk about hell.
Mhm.
And it's also true that as Christians, we don't know how to have the conversation around money.
Yeah.
A lot of pastors, matter of fact, I was just talking, Derek was asked to preach at another church and to do the tithing sermon.
They didn't want their guy to do the
He didn't
sermon.
want to do it.
Whoa.
Because, well, there's something, I'll tell you, sometimes it's easier to hear a hard conversation like that from somebody who's not your lead pastor.
Directly involved. That's true. I can see that.
But I'm not saying it was right or wrong.
No. But I understand the hesitation, right? So it's like so many people when they just like, oh, here comes a message about tithing, is going to ask me to
Yeah.
work up my wallet. And if it came from that leader, it's going to feel that way. But if it's like, oh, okay, he invited someone else in who's not connected to this in some, aside from literally being connected to the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
right, to talk about it, then now it's like a different perspective. Maybe they'd be a little more, I don't know. I'm not saying people have a hard time hearing that, but some people.
Well, and I can tell you, like, I'm never nervous talking about money,
Hmm.
but there's always a little bit of hesitancy
Hmm.
because unfortunately the church has gotten such a bad rap.
Yeah.
And there have been really bad stewards of finances. I mean, I remember, and you weren't even born yet, Jim Baker.
Okay.
Jim Baker was,
I've heard the name.
he was a televangelist. I mean, I actually had a friend whose dad didn't go to church, watch Jim Baker, Jim and Tammy Faye. And
Now they're not the people that recent movie was just about, right?
Tammy Faye was, yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, so she just died of cancer a few years ago, but
Uh,
they had this huge televangelism show, and a lot of Christians and non-Christians watched it.
uh,
And then it was discovered that he was, I mean, all kinds of financial improprieties, lining his own pockets. I mean, it was horrible. He served prison time,
really?
and I still remember my friend's dad when all that happened. It kind of disheartened him towards church.
Yeah, how could it not?
Right. And unfortunately, we hear about this regularly. And I think the danger is that if we don't talk about money,
Hmm.
and this is, and I want to be clear, we're going to talk more than just about money.
Yeah, we're talking about investing for every stance of the word, not just.
Yeah, because I think, again, if money is the key, one we understand the most,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of ways that we invest. And I think the danger is when Christians are afraid to talk about money and when pastors are afraid to talk about money, we're actually missing an area that God considers a very important part of our discipleship.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, I see that.
and and I've shared this before. I had a pastor years ago. I was not taught the power of tithe or what the biblical understanding of tithe was well.
Hmm.
And so I didn't tithe for years.
Mm.
And because I didn't understand it, I thought it was just one of those things that you were supposed to do if you felt like it.
Yeah.
And I had, and again, I think so many pastors just trying to do the best they can,
Hmm.
especially in discipling people. So by no means do I want to shame anybody, especially the people who poured into my life early on.
Hmm. Hmm.
But money was one of those conversations that just always seemed to not be talked about well.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, if you don't understand money, you actually don't understand the rest of investment.
Well, right. Well, so it's kind of like the way you described it between the confessing. Is like we have this one linear view of it, but actually, if you understand what it means at its core, you
Yes.
start to actually understand what all it's connected to. So you're
And
saying the same with investment.
the same is true. And the reason why you have to talk about money first before you get into investing is that, and I've heard this all the time. Oh, Jason, I tithe with my time.
See, and that's actually an area where I struggled with tithing for a long time, especially because I'd say the majority of my, I don't know, you want to call it seriousness of taking faith, right? Like
Yeah,
the adolescent faith versus, okay, now I'm going to get into this.
yeah.
A lot of it, I've been working for the church. And so my mind was attached to that for a long time in
Yeah.
regards to tithing. I was like, well, I already do this, I already do these things. So I totally understand that mentality.
And when people say I tithe with my time, what they're really saying is, well, give God my time, but I'm not giving him my money.
Sure. Yeah, there's certain things I'll trust him with. I trust him with my
That's right.
time and my,
And here's the thing. And the reality is,
yeah,
and I even have people say, Jason, well, you know how much my time is worth. And I'm
sure.
like, well, you have a wrong view of what tithing is, but I'll also say you have a wrong view of what investing is.
Hmm.
And we're going to talk. I want to talk more specifically about what does it mean to invest in the kingdom of God, and how does tithing play into that. But let's first start off. Okay,
Yeah,
so
bring it in.
uh, I don't know what anybody gives in our church.
Yeah,
Okay, and that's a decision I've made. I've had pastors who tell me they think I'm wrong for doing that. And they might be right. I had one pastor who said, Jason, if you don't know what people are giving, how can you disciple them? Right?
sure. I see. Like they're looking at it from like a soul care perspective.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's like, well, no, you have a responsibility to care for everybody's souls. But here's the problem. Um, and maybe this is a weakness in me and maybe not other pastors,
Mm,
but it's so easy then to get fixated on who gives the most.
sure. I don't know. There's a part of me, and maybe this is like a parenting mentality, and I'm not a parent, so I, I, I don't understand this at
Yeah, so
all.
I appreciate your honesty there.
Yeah, but in my mind, is it not somewhat healthy to give your child, or in this case, these sheep that you're pasturing over, or so on and so forth, a little bit of their own responsibility in their soul care, right? Like you can trust them. It's like, hey, this is something that is
Yeah.
important. It's up to you to do
Well,
it.
well, there's a couple ways that I've heard, and I actually see the merits of both. So I don't want to say that my way is the right way. My
Sure,
way is a way,
sure,
right?
yeah,
So the reason why I chose not to know what anybody is giving is I never want anybody to accuse me of showing favoritism because somebody gives money.
right.
Now, here's the other thing. I also don't fundraise. I don't go around and end of year, I don't call people's houses and say, hey,
Mm,
we need to make budget. Can you give this? And there's nothing wrong with that. Let me be clear.
mhm,
Biblically, the Apostle Paul fundraised.
mhm, mhm.
Okay. Biblically, I think you could make an argument that it's okay for a pastor uh, to care about what people are giving as a
Yeah,
discipleship
yeah,
issue. Okay,
mhm,
so no, but my decision came down to is that one, we have a wonderful team.
mhm.
There are people who know what who's giving what. And one pastor said it to me this way, Jason, if I know somebody tithes regularly, it lets me know that they bought into our church.
Oh, okay, I see.
And there's wisdom in that,
Hmm.
right? I've also had somebody say, Jason, if I see somebody who gives regularly and all of a sudden they don't, well then I can call them and find out why aren't they giving.
Sure. It can be another tool of measuring how someone's doing.
Yep. In fact, and sometimes it can be a way of going in and saying, "Hey, I noticed you're not giving. Is everything okay?" Instead
Mhm.
of "Why aren't you tithing?"
Yeah, sure.
It's a "Hey, are you okay?
No, our
We're noticing your tithing is not happening."
yeah.
And a lot of churches, and I know this because I've talked to pastors that do this. If they find somebody who's a tithing part of their community and they're financially struggling, the church will come alongside of them and support them.
That's what I was gonna say is it's if you step into it with a manner of looking to care for someone,
Yeah.
like that's way different.
And so that's again, I think there's wisdom in
Yeah,
doing that. Now, so
cool.
why don't I know what anybody gives? I think in our culture, um, I
Our
think
culture is in Zion
as in
or
Zion,
okay.
and just I also just who I am. I'm not somebody who cares about what people give.
Okay.
If you give $1 million, you can give $10. I'm going to love you the same. I'm going to care for you the same. Um, but I never want there to be a question of, well, Jason only cares because they're the big givers. And now, and in fact, I think there are limits to both sides. The one danger of me not knowing is there are people in our church who are really actively involved, but their tithing is an area where their discipleship isn't growing,
Mm,
right? And so how can I challenge that and encourage that?
hmm.
But then I think there are lots of areas in your life where I don't know where your discipleship is growing,
That's true. Yeah.
right? So that
Yeah.
goes back to your point. There's a personal responsibility. The other side of it is, for me, we don't talk about money a lot. In fact, I've been in the lead pastor position for 3 years now, right?
Hmm.
I think I've talked about money once.
Sure.
And it was actually more of a passive comment. It wasn't even like it was, we talked briefly about
Hmm.
tithing and the promise of tithe, and that was it. Maybe twice, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not because I'm afraid to talk about money.
Hmm.
It's because I just didn't feel the need to.
And there is a cultural aspect to it too, is where people are ready to hear it. I don't know, and things
And
like that.
I
And
think there's sometimes some people are gun shy, especially if you come from an environment where if you were under a ministry, under a pastor who money was, they were obsessed with money,
sure.
or every conversation seemed to come back to money, or if you're not sure how they spent their money, right?
It's also something I think about all the time when we hit certain topics. I wouldn't say that we're like, I don't know what you want to call, well, there's a word for it, but like a newbie friendly church where it's like we're always just doing messages tailored to new people all the time. I don't think we are one of
No, we're
those.
not.
But what I'm saying is I do always have that thought in the back of my mind is, if what if someone new is sitting in the room right now, what message are they hearing, right?
So
And if
yeah.
they came in and the finance message, that they might think, oh, yep, here's another church
Okay, so it's
talking about
interesting
it.
that you bring that up, because let's talk about, okay, so let's move past the tithing
Yep.
conversation, because
Yep.
that's not the point of this, right?
Yep.
God cares about your money
Hmm.
because where your heart is, your treasure is where your heart is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And where your heart is where your treasure tends to be. Okay, Jesus' words, not mine.
Hmm.
um, when people are willing to give everything but their checkbook to Jesus, they're really not giving everything to Jesus.
Hmm. And it could
Because
be anything.
anything, right?
Hmm.
And so let's even look at, um, if you think about the culture around us. Okay, so people say the church is obsessed with money.
Hmm.
I'd tell you, everything is obsessed with money.
Sure. Makes the world go around.
Your bank is obsessed with money.
Hmm.
Your hobby is obsessed with money.
Mm.
Tell me one hobby that doesn't cost anything.
Breathing.
That's a hobby, right? And in fact, here's the crazy part. I know individuals who will gladly spend inordinate amounts of money on their hobby,
Yeah.
and they'll go, well, Jason, that's an investment in me. Now we're going to
There you
talk
go.
about
I see
investment,
it.
right?
Yep, I see it.
Well, it's not that big of a deal, but here's the thing, that they keep on wanting more and more. So okay, and I'm not going to pick on any one thing for a specific reason. Let's be clear. I'm not targeting anybody.
Hmm.
Fishing.
Sure.
Okay. So if you're a fisherman, and I enjoy fishing,
Hmm.
right? Man, I know fishermen who will go out and they'll plunk hundreds of dollars on lures.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in fact, when a new pole comes out, what do they have to have?
I
A new
mean,
pole.
new pole, new tackle box,
Yep.
new.
And is there anything wrong with that?
No,
No, no,
no.
right? It's part of it.
And something to value.
But then when the church talks about finances, oh, we can't talk about money. We can't talk about it.
Mm.
But everybody else, everything else, every job you work at, money is an important thing, right?
Yeah.
And so now let's think about this. If God is truly the God of everything and the things that matter to God, then of course money matters to God.
Hmm.
And it's not because money is God. In fact, the reason why God cares about your money is he wants to make sure that money doesn't become your God.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other part though. When you think about your future, this whole idea of retirement is a rather modern invention.
Okay.
Didn't exist. You think about the 1800s.
Yeah.
Did they have 401ks?
No.
Right? They didn't have retirement plans. You worked until you died. Now, you also died when you were 50 from cholera or whatever, cholera. All of a sudden the 401k came in, and this idea of retirement came in, and what we're investing in is our future to relax, to not have a job.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, is there anything wrong with that? No. You want to hear us, and I wish I had thought of the statistic, like actually did some research, but there's tons of research that shows that when people retire, if they don't have purpose in their life, they die sooner
Yeah.
than if they had a job.
Yeah.
So the whole thing they were investing in was this idea of, well, I want to play golf all the time. And I've talked to several of my friends who are retired, and they're like, yeah, that was great for a couple months. Like, I
Yeah.
got to golf every day, I got to fish every day, and then all of a sudden it got pointless,
Yeah.
right? And it's because retirement is not actually what you're investing in.
No.
And so let's think about other investments. Okay, so again, everything costs money.
Hmm.
Everything costs money, and you can invest in yourself. But here's the thing: when you invest in yourself, what happens when you die? What are you leaving?
Nothing.
Nothing. If all you're doing is investing in yourself, what you're leaving is nothing. And
Yeah.
there's a word for that. It's called legacy, right? You
Yep.
just you gave me that Hamilton quote.
Yeah. I'll say it here
Yeah,
is
say
it
it.
was
Yeah.
in Hamilton, he says, legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see.
Right. So let's think about this idea of investment versus tithe. Okay, so the uh, tithing is an act of worship and obedience.
Mm-hmm.
Tithing is not the same as investing. Now, let's be clear. When you tithe, you are investing, but it is primarily something that God calls us to do as people as an act of worship and an act of obedience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why when health and wealth gospel preachers get up there and say, if you give the Lord your $10, he'll give you $100, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's
Very Southern,
very
like right off the bat. No, I mean your accent.
Yep, well, there's a reason for that because in the Bible Belt, the health and wealth gospel is huge.
Is it? Okay.
And so there's this you hear that in a lot of the preachers, and here's the crazy part. I'm not saying that these preachers aren't preaching Jesus as well, but they're preaching Jesus plus money.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah.
That somehow, and I had somebody a really nice guy who said, God cares about my prosperity. And the reason why people think that
Oh, okay. I see.
is usually what they mean by that is God wants me to have everything I desire. He
Yeah,
wants
sure.
he wants me to have money. He wants me to have the big
Yeah.
house. He wants me to have all those things. No,
Sure. Yeah, it's what's it? It's that kind of almost a misinterpretation of I have a plan for you to give you this.
Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Yep. A plan to prosper you, not to
Yep.
harm you, right?
Yep.
And it's a complete misunderstanding of that. But the bigger part is it depends on what God's definition of prospering is versus your definition of prospering.
Yeah, and we talked about that a lot, is it doesn't always look the way we think it does.
Usually it doesn't.
Yeah.
Every time Israel prospered, they fell into sin.
Sure.
So there's this king named Hezekiah. Okay. So Hezekiah, his father was a really wicked man. Hezekiah brought all this reform in Israel's kingdom, did tremendous things, right?
Mm.
Brought people back, tore down idols, did all these things. Hezekiah gets sick
Mm.
and he's going to die. Now remember, he's done all these religious reforms in Israel as king of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And Hezekiah pleads to, I think it's the prophet Isaiah, and he repents to the Lord and he pleads to the Lord, spare my life. Spare my life.
Mm.
Let me live. And again, this is a man who's been faithful to the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay, now check this out. And the Lord tells, again, I think it's Isaiah, tells Isaiah, hey, because he called out to me, I've heard his prayer. He's going to live 15 more years.
Mm.
So Isaiah comes to Hezekiah and says, hey, the Lord heard you. And Isaiah gives him a salve, and he's healed of this thing that was killing him.
Wow.
Now, here's the crazy part. Hezekiah, who loved Jesus, loved God.
Mhm.
Jesus wasn't on the scene yet.
Not on the scene yet.
Loved God, did all these wonderful religious things, restored Israel to its spiritual fervor for the Lord.
Mm.
He loses sight of what matters. And the Babylonian king, the king of Babylon, is entertaining, and he comes into Hezekiah's palace. And Hezekiah comes in, and instead of showing all the wonderful things that God has done, Hezekiah shows him all of the palace treasure,
Mm.
all the money that he's stored up, all the wealth to the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian king. And there's some speculation, but it's most likely he was trying to say, look at what I've accumulated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When the real investment, what made Hezekiah a great king beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
was all the things he did to bring people back to God.
Yeah.
And yet he had that extra 15 years to live, and he was more worried about his own accumulation. And the prophet Isaiah, the Lord tells him this, and the prophet Isaiah says, and because of this, now you're going to lose the kingdom.
Hmm.
And
Oh.
Babylon's going to take it.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. That makes sense.
Babylon's going to take it. And so what happened to Hezekiah? Well, the failure of Hezekiah, he started off really strong, is that for some of us as Christians, we can do so many things well, but when we think about the future, we forget the purpose of the future.
Mm.
And this is where the idea of investment comes in. I want to read the Apostle Paul to you in the book of Galatians, okay? And I think it's important as we read this section in Galatians chapter 6. He's going to talk about reaping and sowing, and as Christians, I think we've heard these verses, but I'll just read them. Okay, this is starting with 6:1. Brothers and sisters, so obviously he's talking to the church.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently.
Mm.
Okay, you notice we're supposed to restore them, and how you restore is by helping them get out of that sin.
Sure. Gently.
But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Okay, so there's good wisdom here. Is Before you go in and try and correct somebody and help restore somebody, make sure that they're not in an area that could lead you astray.
Yeah, make sure you're good too.
That's right. Because you could be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. So the carrying each other's burdens is important. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. Now, wait a second. First, he said we should carry each other's burdens. Now he's saying each one should carry their own load. Seems like a contradiction, but what Paul is saying is, no, your responsibility is to care for each other, but make sure you're not being a burden on somebody else.
Mm.
So if you're in a need, I
Mhm.
can come alongside, but don't come in and expect me to carry your burden because you're a burdensome person.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It also kind of because it was saying make sure you're good before you go to help with this. It's like, hey, do everything that you can to be, right with where you need to be, and then there's nothing wrong with going out and needing help.
Oh no, if we need help, but there are other people who just want to be a burden on somebody else.
Yeah, or just want to be taken care of in a
Yep.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now this is going to matter for the investment piece.
Okay.
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 For each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instructor. Now, Paul actually is referring to the fact that pastors should be paid. That's what that verse is all about.
So those who are instructed,
I'm an instructor as a
you
pastor.
are an instructor.
So when somebody say, well, why do pastors get paid? Because you're sharing with me the fact that I'm instructing you and helping you grow in your faith. That's now, you don't pay me, the church pays me. But this was, Paul's alluding to this idea of who's the instructor. He's referring to your pastors and teachers. Now, that's not the point of this, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just being faithful to the text. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever sows to please their flesh from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what does this have to do in investing? The idea that Paul is putting forth to the church in Galatians, and it's important to know what's going on in the Galatians church. There's this group called the Judaizers who are trying to encourage Christian believers to get circumcised, saying you can't really be a Christian until you're circumcised. Okay, so big division among Gentiles, Jews, Jewish Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's beginning by coming in and saying, listen, all of us can be caught in sin, and before this he leans into all kinds of different sins, what it means to live by life by the Spirit, life by the flesh. He then says, if you catch somebody in sin, who's struggling with sin, restore that person gently, but make sure that they're not in a sin that could drag you down. So to quote Rich Mullins, who was a Christian singer in the 80s and 90s, you're not as strong as you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah. It says it right there. It's like, if you think you are something, you are not.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you're not coming in going, oh, I've got this figured out. I'm going to restore this person. And then he says, now we should carry each other's burdens, but carry your own load. And it sounds like he's double speaking, but he's not. What he's saying is that all of us have times of need, but that's different than the person who's just going around expecting everybody to carry their load for them.
Yeah. Yep.
All of us have times when our pack is too heavy. When I was in high school, we used to do a thing called growth encounter. We'd go backpacking up into the San Gorgonio Mountains, okay, and we'd do switchbacks. And there was a rule that if somebody got tired, whoever was the slowest walked in the front, not the back, because the problem is the strong hikers will get ahead of everybody else.
Yep.
So by putting the slow people in the front, it makes everybody go the same speed. It's interesting. All of those who were in the back were complaining about how slow it was because they were not caring about other people's burdens. But if your pack got too heavy, not because you weren't willing to carry it, but because it was too much for you, the person who is stronger would come and take their pack from you and carry it until you were strong enough to do it, okay? Now, all of a sudden, he says, and including that, and I want to speak frankly here as a pastor, part of my job is to carry people's burdens. That is a large portion of my job. Another large portion of my job is instructing people. And instructing means sometimes I have to share things and teach things that people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Or don't like to hear. Or I have to say things they don't agree with, right?
What if part of caring for them in that problem or that weakness is to tell them some harsh truths?
And now Paul's going to give a harsh truth.
Yes.
And he says, don't be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Okay.
Mhm.
We live in a farming community.
Mhm.
Whatever you sow, you're going to reap. So if I sow corn, I'm going to reap corn. I don't sow corn and expect strawberries.
Right.
I also can't choose to sow and then expect to reap something that I never sowed.
Hmm. Sure.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
you can't not put seeds in the ground.
And so he's saying, first of all, don't sow in the flesh.
Mm.
Because if you sow in the flesh, what are you going to reap?
The flesh.
And the flesh is referring to bad things.
Right.
Okay, now let's talk about money.
Yep.
Remember, I'm going to tie this all in together.
Yep.
When you're willing to spend hundreds, thousands of dollars on things that are in the flesh, what are you ultimately going to reap? Fleshly things.
Yes.
Because money is what pours into those things.
Hmm.
What happens when you sow your money into things of the kingdom, into God?
Hmm.
What do you reap?
Kingdom.
Kingdom things. And here's the crazy part. And again, it's tithe, but it's not about tithing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. When Lisa and I started tithing seriously,
Hmm.
there's never been a time that God has not provided for us.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean there hasn't been times that it wasn't tough.
Hmm.
It also doesn't mean that we were flush with cash in the bank.
Hmm.
It means that God has consistently been faithful.
Providence doesn't always mean like that massive prosperity, like massive pile.
Rarely does it mean
Yeah.
that. In fact, if we take the rest of the gospel seriously, God is wise, and to him who is faithful with little, God will be faithful. He'll be faithful with much.
Yeah.
If you're not faithfully stewarding the resources that God has given you to invest in his kingdom,
Hmm.
he's not going to bless you.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that people who don't love Jesus or don't tithe don't get rich. No, they do. And here's the sad part. If you watch the news, how many rich people are miserable?
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, what was it? It seems like almost every month, every other month, you hear about a Hollywood star who commits suicide.
Sure. Yeah, or something like that.
Matthew Perry didn't
Mhm.
commit suicide, but why was he on drugs?
Sure. There was something missing in his life.
Yeah, so the money obviously wasn't the issue. And that's the lie of the flesh, is the flesh says that if I invest in this thing, it's going to make me feel good. It's going to reward me with what I want. And in fact, it leaves you empty. So you pour more into that.
Mm. Well, and I think one thing that I think maybe is another hang up is even with your language there, it's like everything that you just said is still an investment in self. When is it that we can finally start investing in something larger than us?
And here's the part where it comes in. Let us not become weary in doing good.
Mm.
Because when I do good for others, do I benefit from that? Yes, but I may not get an immediate benefit.
Hmm. Yeah.
So when we invest, and the whole point of what investment means is a future. When a farmer plants his crop, when he plants the seeds, he's hoping in the future that the seed's going to grow.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
When we invest our money in our 401k, or if you're a teacher or work for the government in IPERS, or
Hmm.
you invest in Bitcoin or whatever else it is, it's
Mhm.
always about a future.
Yep.
The problem is that if you put your hope in the money,
Hmm.
what happens when the money's not there?
Hmm.
Now your investment is lost and you are you're a wreck of yourself
Hmm.
because you put your hope in your money. When we invest in God's kingdom, it is not a guarantee that you're going to be wealthy. In fact, if you're investing well in God's kingdom, you're probably consistently generous,
Sure.
giving more and more, right? So if we look at this idea of investing, investing is about a future.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about the kingdom of God. My son's about ready to turn 15.
Ugh. Wow.
I know. My daughter's 16.
Yeah.
My son's about ready to turn 15. I want my kids to love Jesus,
Yeah.
and I want my kids to love the church.
Mm.
But they're not going to probably love this church that I'm in now. And what I mean by that is I don't mean Zion.
Hmm.
I mean the kind of church, the things that matter to me may not speak to them.
Oh, I see.
And what happens if I hold on, if what I'm holding on to investment wise is about what matters to me? Am I investing in the future or am I investing in myself?
Sure. It's almost like you're not letting it grow.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so if when I'm investing in, I'm thinking through and I'm saying, okay, I got to realize that I invest with finances, but I also invest with my time, and I also invest with my energy and my gifts.
I think there's also an acknowledgement of knowing you're investing with the knowledge that things are going to change and happen.
And in fact, if we're doing it right, they should change,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so this is now when all of a sudden we look at the investment, and what God is asking is, do you care more about a kingdom investment or a Jason investment?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I care about a Jason investment, the only thing I'm going to ask is, what do I get in return?
And the only thing you're going to reap from that is,
And in fact, my children and hopefully my grandchildren and my great grandchildren, if I'm lucky enough to have them or
yeah.
blessed enough to have them, I don't believe in luck. Um, but if the only thing that I'm investing in from a church perspective is what I get out of it, then what happens when I die?
Mm-hmm.
That investment dies with me.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm investing my finances, my time, my treasure, my resources into the future of the church, into the next generation, to what's going to meet them, because the church has changed, culture has changed. Then all of a sudden, when I invest in that, I'm not thinking about what do I get. I'm asking, what do they get? And what they get is Jesus, because that's what I care about. I want them to get Jesus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so I don't know if this makes any sense at all, but a thought that just came across my mind is like that whole we use a lot of financial language even in regards to like our salvation, right?
Yeah.
Jesus paid our debts,
Yeah.
right? So that's a financial
Telestai, paid in full.
Yeah, yep, that's like a financial kind of phrase. And so I thought about it where I was like, well, if Jesus took care of our debts, then that means we're at a baseline of zero, right? We're like we don't have things but we don't have debts. Like Jesus took care of it. Boom, here's where we are.
Yeah.
And that's where the investment opportunity aligns itself because when we're in Jesus, it's not like we're going in the negative. I mean, we could, but that's why we continuously rely on him. But then that's why I think if you invest, you grow the almost like the kingdom wealth. And that's maybe part of not our purpose, but part of our discipling process is that we understand that no, part of building up the wealth of the kingdom is that I don't know, I was bought, right?
Yeah, and I think so. I get what you're saying. I think we have to be careful with that
Yeah.
because
And I
Jesus,
probably didn't say it very eloquently.
well, I think the spirit of what you're saying is true. But when it says our debt was paid in full, what it's referring to is our sin.
Yeah, no, I know that.
Yeah.
No, I know that. But that's what I mean from like that financial language. And what I'm saying is then not like a merits-based thing where now we're earning more interest for the kingdom. I just mean that's what the investment opportunity is.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I think if we look at it that way, yeah, like if I understand that Jesus paid my debt, and here's the thing, I want my children to know their debt has been paid
That's
for.
what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the gospel.
Yeah. Yep.
So we invest in the gospel. We invest in churches, and we
Just
invest
complicated the very beautiful message of the gospel in some way to try to fit.
but
That's why you're the pastor and I'm not.
but the challenge of investment is that most of us only invest because of what I get in return.
Sure.
Now, the beautiful thing about the kingdom is when I invest in God's kingdom, the Bible does say I'll receive a heavenly reward.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's not the object. And it's okay that it's the subject, but it's not the object of my affection. My object is Jesus.
Yeah.
And because I want a kingdom and a legacy that is bigger than me.
Mm-hmm.
So Zion is 152 years old, I think it is now, right?
Sweet. Yeah.
This is like our third or fourth building.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So there was a building that was built in the 1800s, and then there was a second building, and then they built this building. They did an addition onto the building, and now we have the dock. Okay. So let's fast forward. Each generation that had to move the building, they were investing in something in the future, and you always had individuals who were upset when the building was moved.
Mm.
And then you had those who were like, hey, of course we're going to move. Just like when you buy a new house.
Sure. There's
Right?
a new opportunity.
New
there.
opportunity. You buy a new house for a reason because you see that new opportunity. But there's usually, and let's be clear, a lot of the times when we're struggling with that, it's because there's an emotional connection to a building.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So I get that. And there's empathy with that.
Yeah.
At some point, the things that worked for me aren't going to work for my children.
Mm.
And probably aren't going to work for my grandchildren.
Mm.
And that means the resources, the building, the way we do ministry. Ministry has changed so much, even just in the last 10, 15 years, but for sure in the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? So here's the illustration, and I'll use this on Sunday as well. And again, we record this before the service on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
So I call this the house that God built. And it's an illustration, and all illustrations, all metaphors break apart somewhere, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the foundation of the church is Jesus. He's the footprint in which we build everything on the gospel, right?
Yeah.
So in the Midwest, here in America, we have basements, and really nice houses have really nice basements.
Yep.
In some places, basements are dark and dank, and you just store stuff down there. But a lot now, the new thing is to have basements that are functional and fun, and
Yeah.
that's where the kids play, right? So
Basically, you turn it into a three-story house, basically.
yeah, okay. So a picture of the basement. The basement is where the kids play.
Yep.
And the reason why, when you have friends over, even when my kids have sleepovers, they go to the basement
Mm-hmm.
because they can be loud, they can be messy,
Yep.
and it's still a functional, fun space, but it's not the living space, right? So the kids
Mm-hmm.
are the basement. The parents, or that generation, that parental generation, they're the first story. They're the primary inhabitants of the space
Sure.
at that time. Okay.
Sure.
And every generation has inhabited that space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you get to older parents or younger grandparents, which is my age, so, and I don't know how to break this down exactly. Let's say between about 45 is when I'm an older parent.
I'll censor that so we don't offend anyone.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm
I'm just
offending
kidding.
me, right?
I'm kidding.
So I'm an older parent.
Yeah.
We had kids in our 30s.
Yeah.
If we had kids in our 20s, my kids would be in their 20s right now,
Yep.
right? But we had kids in our 30s, so I'm an older parent. I have friends right now who are becoming grandparents.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm in the second story.
Yeah.
Which means that I'm not even the primary resident in the house anymore. That what the house looks like doesn't primarily fit my needs. It fits the needs of what would be the generation right underneath me.
Sure.
Right? The parents
Yep.
of the young kids.
Yep.
And so my generation, the younger grandparents to older grandparents are that second story. And let's picture the attic. The attic is where you store all the treasures, the fun things of your house of the past. But it's the things that I thought were important to my house when I was on the first floor probably aren't going to be there for my kids. Things that I'm like, that's awesome. All my Star Wars things, my son's going to be like, I don't care. Get rid of those, right? Now imagine this for a moment. The final generation is meant to be the protective covering.
Yeah.
And the final generation is the roof of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And the roof matters because what does a roof do? It protects from the elements.
Mm-hmm.
The focus isn't on the roof,
Mm-hmm.
but the roof matters because the roof provides care and protection so that those who are living in the house. So first generation, the youngest generation
Yep.
is in the basement, right?
Basement.
And as they get older, they're going to move to the first floor.
Yep.
And as that first floor gets older, they're going to move to the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's going to come a point in time in which, well, I have to move. And this is going to come for me probably in the next 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
where the church is no longer going to even reflect maybe what I look like. It doesn't mean I'm not a part of the church. It doesn't mean I don't love the church. But I'm going to move to that roof where my primary job is to protect those who live in the house. Because what's the purpose of a house? It's to be lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine for a moment if I say to my children, hey guys, okay, so we bought our house, it's paid off. You're going to inherit it, but here's the deal. If you inherit the house, you have to keep the paint the same color. All the decorations, all the things that we did in the house, it has to stay.
Dining table needs to stay where it's at.
Yep, the walls
Couch
can't move
needs
the
to stay.
walls. All the decor, all the things.
Don't buy a new TV.
Don't buy them. In fact, you got to do this. And the reason why, because I'm leaving you this house.
Yep.
No parent would ever do that. No grandparent would ever do that. What they'd say is, I'm leaving you this house because the purpose of a house is to be lived in.
Well, and would the kid even want the house?
No, the kid's not going to want the house because they're going to say it doesn't reflect me.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is what it means to invest. I'm paying off a mortgage on my house right now, right?
Mhm,
And I would
mhm.
love to be able to leave my children my house.
Yeah.
And I'd love to leave them that house debt free
Yeah. Yeah.
so that whether they can sell it so they can buy a new house,
Bigger house.
or they could choose to live in that
Yeah.
house and make it their own because I'm investing in something in the future.
Yeah.
But what happens is, and I have to face this. So so we were talking about new Christians coming into the church or
Mhm, mhm.
non-Christians, right?
Sure.
When I preach through the lens of investment.
Okay.
Let me explain what I mean by this. I don't just preach to one group of people. I try and preach to the non-Christian,
Mhm.
to the new Christian, to the seasoned Christian, and to the disheartened Christian.
Mm.
Almost every sermon I do, I'm trying to hit all four targets.
Yeah. Wow.
And I've had people ask me, Jason, why are sermons 35 minutes, 40 minutes long? And that's a fair question.
Yeah.
And it's because as I look at the future, I was just listening to a great podcast on this and I've read several articles on it. Your generation, Jaden. So you're now technically would be the first floor.
Okay.
Here's what the research is telling us. Your generation is the most spiritual generation in the last probably 30 years. Now, that doesn't mean they love Jesus.
Oh,
They're spiritual.
I was
They're
gonna say, yeah.
they're spiritually curious. In fact, a lot of them are even reading the Bible
Mm,
out of curiosity. They don't just trust that the Bible is God's word, and they don't even trust that the Bible matters should matter to them. So they're coming into church. They want to understand why the Bible should matter to them,
yeah.
why the Bible is different than all the other things.
Hmm.
Whereas in previous generations, it was expected that people were Christian.
Sure. Yeah.
And that if to be spiritual meant you were a Christian
Yep.
or Catholic,
Yep.
right? Now to be spiritual means you sometimes people make their own religions.
Hmm. Sure.
Their own
Spiritual is, I mean, it's like a new age, everything,
Yeah.
you
Okay,
know.
so now let's think about this. Now, if I'm investing in the future, who am I preaching to? Am I going to preach to the person who thinks that well, all I need is just tell me how to live this?
Hmm.
Who is my generation?
Hmm.
My generation is like, no, I know what I believe. No, you got an entire generation that doesn't even know why they believe or how it should apply.
Hmm.
I'm preaching to the future. I'm not preaching to the past.
Yeah.
And so there I'm even when I preach, that's why sermons, that's why they're a little bit longer, is because think about the content that I'm delivering. It used to be I could do a 25-minute message if all it was I was just telling you how to live.
Hmm.
But your generation doesn't trust that the Bible's even worth following when it comes on how to live.
Hmm.
And then you have an older generation, even older than that, is like, well, no, I just need a homily. I don't even care if the Bible tells me how to live. I just need to know, just give me some things to believe.
Mm.
And by older generation, I mean, even that's still my generation. But
Mm.
if I'm going to invest in the future, the question, again, because remember, investing isn't just about money, it's about our time,
Yeah.
talents, and treasures, but it's also our strategy and how we look at things. And as we're looking at the future, I'm realizing that we have an entire generation that is coming up that distrusts the Bible and Christianity and organized religion as a whole.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? I mean,
Oh,
is
absolutely.
this a true statement for you? And if it's not, disagree with me. But all the research, all the people I talk to that are your age, that are at that 28 and under,
Yeah.
would you consider that an accurate
Oh,
statement? I mean, I think about
I
some of the
I
conversations we've had.
definitely would. I mean, and this isn't putting anyone down in any capacity, but I mean, nine. No, I wouldn't say that's a little over exaggeration. A lot of the people I talk to my age that I express openly that I'm a Christian in some capacity have either some form of disdain towards that word,
Yeah,
even not even that they even understand really, but just the word or the church or
yeah.
this, or they are like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, like I'm also like that's cool that that's what the philosophy that you've subscribed to. I do this one
Yeah.
with this thing. That's how I'm spiritual. And so it's not like I don't think it's just like the organized part of it.
It's the Christian part. They'll pick and choose.
Yeah.
It's the hometown buffet.
Yeah, oh, that's because that's I've met a lot of people. It's like, oh yeah, Christianity. Yeah, I thought Jesus taught about this pretty cool, and this was pretty cool. But then but then what the Taoist said about this, I really like. And so it's like there is a desire. I do see a desire for a lot of people to find something,
They're spiritually
something.
curious.
Yeah.
They're hungrier than ever, which is the opposite of what we thought was going to happen with your generation.
Mm.
We thought your generation was going to be the rise of the people who become atheists. In fact, they're becoming more spiritual. My generation are becoming the nones.
I think even the people who I meet don't call themselves atheists.
No,
Like
agnostic maybe,
agnostic is, I think, a really popular term where it's like, oh, I think there's a
yeah,
power out there somewhere.
or spiritual.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah,
spiritual person,
yeah, yeah,
right? And so let's think again through that language of investment.
yeah,
Okay, now why does this matter? This is so much bigger than a conversation around money.
yeah.
But our money is what allows mission to happen,
Hmm.
and our investment with our time, talents, and treasures what allows investment. I want to see this church have another 150 years, which means I have to invest in your generation and the generation coming up, which means there are things that I may not find valuable, but you do.
Yeah. Is another really good word to throw into this is like there's a the investment in the realm of which we look at it, and then there's like equipping.
Yeah,
I
well,
like,
so then that's the bigger part
yeah,
is that if we're really going to invest, we have to equip a future
yeah,
generation of
yeah,
leaders. And I think
in
about
every capacity.
in every capacity, which is why I think about our relationship, right?
Mm.
And one of the things, Jaden, that I'm grateful for with you is, you and I have had some hard conversations.
Hmm.
And there have been times when and you've always received, because hopefully I love you.
Hmm.
And I'm not coming as the guy who's got it all figured out, because you've come to me with things where you've said, hey, this hurt, or I didn't, whatever. The way we invest in the next generation is not by just coming in, here's my wisdom.
Hmm.
It's the relational component, but it's also, let me show you how I screwed up or how I relate. And I think one of the things that is so critical, and I know this could be such a long
Yeah, I know.
conversation. It's such, but I think
It's
it's so important.
it is.
I think we have to recognize that we are preparing your generation for failure if we don't invest in them spiritually and
Yeah.
in their faith
Yeah.
and in the gospel. And what we're teaching people and what we're teaching our children is that the real investment is in their athletics,
Oh,
or
sure.
that the real investment is in their education, or the real investment is their job or their happiness. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to get to a point where none of that made them, that didn't satisfy.
Oh my gosh, man. Like you said, it could get so big. There's so many videos coming out right now about students that are getting out of oh nice, my computer's gonna die. Our logo might drop. There's so many kids coming out in videos now where they finish college and they have this degree
Yes.
and they have mountains of student loan payments, and they said, I followed what I was told to
Yeah.
do.
It's
I
not,
trusted this
yes.
system that I got handed. What happened?
Yeah.
This didn't give me anything.
So my generation is notorious. I'm a Gen Xer. Is
Sure.
notorious for making fun of millennials and calling them snowflakes. Who made them snowflakes?
Right.
My generation made them
Sure.
snowflakes because we babied them, or we didn't prepare them, or we tried to make everything easier for them.
Sure.
But more importantly, we didn't actually invest in the right things.
Yeah.
We're all investing in something.
Yeah. I think there's equal measure in showing them what is important to invest in and what's not important to invest in. That's what you were saying. It's like I don't always do it right.
Yes.
I'm not always doing exactly what's right, but at least learn by my example and in these capacities, even to see if I'm doing yes
So
or no.
I'm going to take a quick turn here. It's still
Okay,
about investment.
quick.
We got to wrap this up. Okay.
No, we don't.
We're all
Keep going.
investing in something.
Yes.
You are investing in something.
Yep.
Okay. Uh, I've struggled with weight,
Mm.
my physical weight for years.
Mm.
And people say you invest in your health or you don't, right? And there's truth in that. Um, when I go and buy McDonald's because it's easier and faster, I'm investing in something. I'm investing in my immediate need to have food.
Yep.
I'm investing in my taste buds or whatever you
Sure.
want to call it.
Cravings. Or,
Cravings, or even sometimes it's just a convenience.
sure. Or sometimes even it's your emotional health, right?
That's right.
You get a cheeseburger because you're feeling sad.
Yeah. But to invest in my health, there's a sacrifice involved.
Sure.
And that's the hard part, is that when it comes to church, what we're sacrificing for is a kingdom investment that comes with heavenly rewards, that ultimately is about making sure that the gospel, that the next generation loves Jesus. And I shared this with a friend of mine. If I want my kids to love Jesus, I need to show them a Jesus worth loving,
Yeah.
because that's what they're going to gauge it on.
Mhm.
Jesus is worth loving regardless of me, but I'm the image. So if I show them a Jesus, and if I show people a Jesus who's not worth following,
Yeah.
I shouldn't be surprised when my kids don't want to follow Jesus. If I'm not living a life that my non-Christians are going, man, and that includes practicality. It doesn't mean I'm walking around holier than thou or life figured out, but I'm investing all these different resources that come in. So it's our finances, but it's also how we live our lives. It's our priorities. It's the things that matter to us.
Yes.
And the things, when the things that matter to God matter to us. This is why, again, let's go back to the money conversation. When God cares about your money, because your heart and your money are often connected.
Mhm.
When I give God my money, something amazing happens. He grabs the parts of my heart that I didn't know that I was holding back.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, so here's the challenge, and then we could be here for a very long time. Here's the challenge. When you think about investment, how are you investing? How are you investing? You watching,
Mhm.
and Jaden, I'll say the same for you. I'll pose the same question to myself.
Yeah.
Are you sowing into the flesh? Are you sowing into the kingdom?
Mm.
And not as a point of shame, because what I found is when you sow into the kingdom, man, what you reap are the fruits of the Holy Spirit.
I was about to say,
And
yeah.
it's so amazing. And the things that you find, and it doesn't mean it's easier,
No.
but there's a promise that God gives. And I'm excited because I think in the next couple weeks, as we're looking at this whole Like It Matters series, when we invest like it matters, it's not about my return on investment.
No.
It's about a kingdom return on investment.
Yeah. But there is an overflow of blessing,
There
though.
is, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, if you found this helpful or encouraging, share it with your friends. We love when you like or subscribe and leave comments. I want to put together, we've been talking about it. I want to do a Q&R session.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
And so we're gonna find ways to announce it, whether it be through Facebook or
Yeah,
other
we'll find
places.
some sort of like maybe like a panel or a Google Doc of some sort, and we'll
Way to get questions.
release something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and have some questions. Jaden, brother, always love this time.
Dude, so cool.
Thanks for tuning in, and have an awesome day.
Bye.